Hi, today's project is this. This is my drill charging storage center. I built it about 2.5 years ago in about 3 hours, and I hate it. It's a pain to get to. The drawers were craftily built, and the one thing I hate most about it is I put the batteries way up here, and when I want to get them out, I bang my knuckles, and that's not good. So today we're going to resolve all that by making a new one and taking this out to the burn pit. So stay tuned and enjoy the show. When I purchased my house nearly 3 years ago, it included an unfinished shed, which I turned into my workshop. After the renovation was complete, I required storage space for my drills and accessories, so I built a basic version using scrap plywood. It had always intended to be a temporary solution. Now I will build a better one with improved storage features. I designed a new one using SketchUp, created a plywood cut list, and specified the dimensions for all the parts. However, the first task is to clean out the old one and remove it from the shop. I sided the inside of the shop with T11 plywood so I can hang anything anywhere without needing to find a stud. This also means that the screws I need to remove are in easily accessible spots inside the cabinet. My son was enjoying the fall weather and wanted a fire, so I decided to throw the cabinet on the fire to create a cool visual. You know, like bad project goes up in flames kind of thing. So I took the carcass out and threw it on the fire pit. Later on in the video, we'll check how it's doing. The new drill cabinet can be built from one sheet of 4x8 plywood. I began by dividing the sheet into two 4x4 sheets to simplify cutting out the rough size parts. With the SketchUp cut sheet as a guide, I easily identified and marked the cut lines on the plywood. Next, I placed the plywood on the rigid foam and readied my track saw for the cutting. It's worth noting that a circular saw and a straight edge can be used to cut the plywood, achieving the same result. The beauty of the track saw is that you can line up the edge of the track right on your line, and then you run the saw on your track and cut the piece. With the circular saw and a straight edge, you need to know the circular saw shoe size and then offset the straight edge that amount from your cut line. It's not difficult to do, but it's just an added step. Now it's just a matter of laying my track on each cut line and cutting. This is a rinse and repeat operation, but before you know it, all your pieces will be broken down into their rough sizes. Now it's time to cut the pieces to the final size specified in the plans using the table saw. The only exception is I will not cut out the top and bottom, and you'll see why soon enough. While I'm cutting the pieces, maybe we should take a quick peek at the old cabinet in the fire pit. Wow, it went up fast. What worries me is my house is made of the same stuff. I better check my fire extinguishers. The cabinet side and the middle partition are held together by creating dados at the top and bottoms of the assembly. To ensure the dados are properly aligned, I am leaving the top and bottom as one piece and will cut the through dados simultaneously. I have set up the dado stack in the table saw. If you don't have a dado stack, you can easily achieve this with a router and a straight edge, or a dado jig for the router. In the video later on, I will demonstrate how to use a router and a dado jig to cut the dados into the parts. Subsequently, I will cut the top and bottom out, ensuring that the dados align perfectly. Following my plans, I will cut the left side dado first, then the middle dado, and then finally end with the right dado. Once that is complete, using the table saw, I will separate the top and bottom pieces, and the dados will be identical in both panels. I will then take the top and bottom panels to the sliding miter saw and trim them to the correct length. Now that we have trimmed the top and bottom panels to their exact length, let's move on to creating the stop dado for the back of the cabinet. There are several methods to achieve this. One method is to install a plywood width bit in your router table and mark the start and end points on your fence. Another approach is using an adjustable dado jig, such as the one built and sold by Tamar of 3x3 Customs. I will link that in the description below. That jig is what I am using here. This jig is configured for my DeWalt plunge router and didn't take long to make. The initial step involves making a stop dado for the back panel on the top and bottom panels. While a continuous dado would have been easier, I opted for this method for a better aesthetic appearance. Subsequently, the side and middle partitions will receive a mix of stop dados for the drill holders and through dados for the shelves in the different compartments. The left side panel will get a stop dado and a through dado on the interior side. The middle partition will get one stop dado and a single through dado on the left interior side. On the right interior side, there will be two through dados. The right side panel will get two through dados on the interior side. As you can see, the jig makes a perfect stop dado every time. Now that we've completed the carcass parts, let's focus on the drill holder. The slots are 1 5/8 inches wide, and I began by marking the slots on the plywood piece that would serve as a shelf. Although I initially used a somewhat awkward angle for filming, my second angle was even worse. I did my best to capture clear footage of my hand for you. A note to self: in future videos, consider relocating the drill press for better positioning. Currently I have 4 drills, so I added an extra slot for potential expansion. I can't imagine owning or using more than 5 drills simultaneously in the future. After I cut the 5 holes with the Forstner bit, I moved to the bandsaw to cut the straight line to turn the holes into slots. The bandsaw lacks a fence, and I haven't needed one for my mostly curved cuts. Using a fence for these straight cuts would have been helpful. Despite the challenge of cutting 10 straight lines without a reference fence, I took my time and started making the cuts. After finishing the 3rd slot, the length of the plywood would not clear the riser of the bandsaw. This prevented me from continuing on that side of the piece, so I transferred my lines to the other side, flipped the piece over, and completed the cuts. Now that I have completed all the slots, it's time to use the oscillating spindle sander to smooth out the cuts. I removed the belt sander apparatus and attached a spindle that closely matches the width of the slot. I then rounded over the front of all the corners and sanded the straight runs until they were nice and smooth. I had a whole glue-up sequence filmed, which I had posted to Instagram, but now I can't locate it. So instead, you are seeing me attempt to put on edge banding to cover the plywood edges. It was my first time using iron-on banding, and it wasn't perfect, but it will do. After the internal glue-up dried and I installed all the shelves into the corresponding dados, it was time for me to glue in the back panel. The glue-up is always stressful for me. I always forget to do a dry fit because I'm so excited to get the project moving. This time I took my time and made sure everything was perfect before applying the glue. As the glue dried for the back panel, I will begin squaring up the doors for the cabinet. I added doors to this cabinet to keep the dust out of the charging electronics and give it a finished look. Using my panel cutting sled, I cut one side, flipped it over, marked it for length, and cut it to the size. I sized the height of the door using the same method. I repeat the same procedure for the second door based on the dimensions in my plans. This build has been run-of-the-mill for drill cabinets, but now we can start the cool stuff. I am placing a 4/4 poplar board on the miter saw station and cutting 3 pieces to the same length. These pieces will be the start of one of the storage units for the cabinet. Once completed, they will resemble steps. Due to the nature of the items I'm storing, I had to slightly alter the design from the original plans. One of the storage blocks will resemble 3 steps, and I had to modify the other one for 2 steps and an additional flat block. All were made with the pieces I cut here. I plan to create blocks that can hold drill and driver bits, Forstner and spade bits, and various other accessories that a drill can use. I will mark the locations for the items using the actual items as reference for the size hole they need. Then I can drill the holes in the blocks for those items. Then assemble the blocks using glue. The previous block will provide a positive stop for the items as each block is stacked on top of the other. The number of holes you need for the storage blocks depends on the items and quantities you plan to store. I am going to store my Forstner bits on one side of the storage blocks, while the other side will store driver bits, drill bits, fixed bits, and other drill accessories. After determining what you want to store and where you want to place them, you can mark the locations for the holes and then proceed to drill them. I had to drill 4 holes of different diameters. I positioned the pins on the drill press table to ensure consistent hole placement on each block. Finally, I meticulously drilled all the required holes in the blocks. Now that I've completed all the holes in the storage blocks, it's time to install the drill cabinet doors. I purchased a set of black no mortise hinges from Amazon. When I installed them, my back kept blocking the shot, so I refilmed the installation of the hinges using some scrap plywood to show the process. First, I used the 2-inch side of my 1-2-3 measuring block to place each hinge either 2 inches from the bottom of the top panel or 2 inches from the top of the bottom panel. I struck a line for the placement of the hinge, then I held the hinge to my line and pre-drilled centered holes with the self-centering bit, commonly known as a VIX bit. Once I drilled out the panels for the hinge on the side panel, I used the supplied screws to fasten the hinge to the appropriate side panel. Once all 4 hinges were attached to the side panels, I could now attach the doors. I followed the same procedure for each door. I positioned the door to the hinge, pre-drilled the holes, and then attached the door to the moving part of the hinge. I repeated this process 4 times, installing 2 hinges per door. I made some minor adjustment for fit and tested their operation. Here they are and installed. It's time for me to install the slides for the drill accessory pull-out shelf. I will use 10-inch full extension slides. I find installing slides challenging, even though I love to use them for slide-out storage and drawers. I have to lay the center marks on the inside of the cabinet, determine the distance from the edge of the cabinet, and screw the parts down for the slide assembly. I make sure the center of the holes for the screws stay centered on my layout line. Getting the camera, my arm, and the drill into the small cubby that houses the drill accessories is difficult. I repeat the process for the second slide. The mating part of the slide attaches to the bottom of the pull-out shelf. I carefully measure the exact distance from the shelf center to the mating part center, and then I install the second half of the slide using the same methods I did for the slides installed to the cabinet. I then repeat this process for the second slide of the shelf. The battery charger pull-out shelf is installed similarly, with the measurements adjusted to account for the larger pull-out shelf. So here's the acid test on how accurate my measurements were. Installing the shelf to ensure everything lines up is always stressful for me, but for once it turned out well. Since the initial test went well, I loaded up the driver bits, drill bits, and accessories and ensured the slide action was smooth with it fully loaded. After I set up the mounting screws for the chargers, I installed the pull-out shelf and tested its operation as well. With everything finished, it's time to install the cabinet on the shop wall. I installed a ledger strip to hold the cabinet to the wall while I drive screws to install it to the plywood wall of the shop. Now you see the advantage of plywood, as I don't have to worry about finding a stud. Now that the installation is complete, I can load the cabinet up. Being mildly OCD, I will group my DeWalt drills together, then group together the DeWalt impact drivers, and then the lowly Ryobi drill will be all by its lonesome. You'll notice I placed the drills in the cabinet with the front of the tool out, because from the back of the drills, you can't tell if it's a drill or an impact driver. The DeWalt batteries will go on the top shelf and the Ryobi batteries will go on the second shelf. Finally, I install the chargers and this project is complete. This was an excellent upgrade for me. Everything is more organized and accessible while stored in the same space and not in different areas of the shop. This build was a long time coming, and I'm glad I took the time to update the storage for my drills and drivers. I hope you enjoyed that video. I've created a new drill cabinet, which is a remarkable improvement from the old one I hastily assembled 2 years ago. Now, I no longer have to worry about wrapping my knuckles when removing a battery from the charger. The pull-out storage keeps all my drill accessories in one place, making it easier to find what I'm searching for without looking through the entire shop. I will also include a link to Tamar's 3x3 custom video for the adjustable width dado I used in the description below. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section. Remember, you too can make it so.